Jealous mom crashed my wedding with a hateful speech, so I exposed her lies and now she's cutting me out of her will. For context, my mother and I have always had a strained relationship. She divorced my father when I was around 11 years old, and they shared custody of me. Officially, I was supposed to live with my mother every other month, but I ended up spending only 3 or 4 months a year with her. The rest of the time, I lived with my father because my mother was often too busy to look after me. Her job as a real estate agent wasn't particularly demanding, so I suspected she just didn't want to spend time with me. Even before the divorce, we weren't close. Little girls are often their mother's best friends, but my mother had plenty of friends and didn't seem to need me. I needed her, but she never understood that, and we grew apart. Occasionally she would visit me at my dad's house, or have me over at hers, but by the time I turned 13, I realized she wasn't very connected to me. Whenever I stayed at her place, I wished I could go back to my dad's home. Her house never felt like my own. Things worsened when she started dating and bringing boyfriends home. In my late teens, I felt she was jealous of me and saw me as competition. She would put me down and make fun of me, making me uncomfortable and angry. It also made her dates awkward, as they probably wondered what kind of mother would belittle her daughter to impress a man. When I confronted her, she dismissed it as joking and accused me of being overly sensitive. Instead of getting mad, I started retaliating with my own jibes, turning our interactions into petty catfights that drove her dates away. Eventually, she stopped, and I reduced my visits. My dad encouraged me to maintain a relationship with her. Without his insistence, I likely would have cut her off entirely. During a financially rough period for my dad's business, I needed help with college tuition. Reluctantly, I asked my mother. She claimed she couldn't afford to help because she was saving for her wedding and honeymoon. I accepted this, but when I saw her extravagant wedding, I was annoyed. It was clear she could have helped but chose not to, which felt spiteful. Ironically, her marriage didn't last more than 2 years. Despite my frustration, I let it go, not wanting to seem entitled. Now, at almost 28, I recently had my own wedding. My dad insisted I invite my mother, believing family presence was important. Though I wanted to refuse, I find it hard to say no to my father, so I invited her. I told her she needed my approval for her outfit to prevent any inappropriate choices. She sounded disappointed, suggesting she intended to upstage me but couldn't because of my stipulation. She reluctantly sent me a few options, which I approved to avoid drama. On the day of the wedding, my mother seemed fine initially, but during her speech she went off script, launching into a tirade about how I ruined her life and made everything difficult for her. The guests were shocked, and I could see my father's disappointment. In that moment, I decided to respond. I stood up and calmly exposed her lies, detailing how she neglected me, made me feel unwelcome, and refused to help with my education despite her lavish spending on herself. I explained my side without raising my voice, simply laying out the truth. The guests were stunned into silence, and my mother was visibly furious. She left the wedding in a huff, and afterward she informed me that I was being cut out of her will. While the confrontation was dramatic, I felt a sense of relief. For too long, I had allowed her to manipulate the narrative. Exposing the truth was liberating, even if it meant losing any potential inheritance. I now feel free to live my life without her toxic influence. Reflecting on everything, I realized that standing up for myself was necessary. My relationship with my mother has always been fraught, but my wedding day was a turning point. I no longer need her validation or approval. My father's support and my newfound sense of self-worth are all I need as I move forward into this new chapter of my life. As a child, I didn't understand why my mother was so distant. I would see other kids with their moms, sharing close bonds, and it made me feel even more isolated. My father tried to fill that gap, but there were moments when I deeply felt the absence of a nurturing mother figure. I yearned for those mother-daughter moments that I saw in movies and read about in books, but they never materialized. Over time, I learned to cope with the absence of my mother's affection, but it left a lasting impact on how I viewed familial relationships. During high school, the gap between my mother and me widened. I was involved in various activity sports, drama club, and volunteering, which kept me busy and away from home. My father supported all my endeavors, attending every game and play, but my mother was conspicuously absent. She would occasionally ask about my activities, but it always felt like she was doing it out of obligation rather than genuine interest. It was around this time that I started to build a wall around my emotions, especially concerning her. If she didn't care, why should I? When it came time to apply for colleges, my father was my rock. He helped with applications, essays, and even accompanied me on campus visits. My mother, on the other hand, didn't show much interest. It was as if she was a distant relative rather than my mother. When I got accepted into a prestigious university, my father was over the moon. My mother, however, gave a lukewarm congratulations, adding that she hoped I would be able to manage financially. It was another subtle jab, reminding me that she wasn't going to offer any support. The financial strain on my father was immense, and despite his best efforts, we needed help. Swallowing my pride, I approached my mother, hoping she would come through for me. Her refusal wasn't a surprise, but the extravagant wedding that followed soon after was a slap in the face. It was clear she had the means but chose not to help out of sheer spite. My father, ever the peacemaker, urged me to let it go, but the hurt lingered. It was a stark reminder of where I stood in her life, an afterthought at best. Throughout college, I worked multiple jobs and took out loans to cover my expenses. I managed to graduate with honors, but my mother didn't attend the ceremony. She sent a card, which felt more like a formality than a gesture of pride. My father, of course, was there, cheering the loudest. His unwavering support kept me grounded, and I was determined to make him proud. As I embarked on my career, my interactions with my mother dwindled. We would exchange the occasional text or holiday card, but there was no real connection. My father continued to encourage me to reach out, but it felt like a futile effort. Every interaction was strained, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she saw me as a burden. When I met my future husband, I found in him the love and support I had longed for. He knew about my complicated relationship with my mother, and always stood by my side. As we planned our wedding, the issue of inviting my mother loomed large. My father insisted on her presence, believing that family should be together on such an important day. Reluctantly, I agreed, setting boundaries to prevent any drama. The lead up to the wedding was tense. My mother seemed to relish the opportunity to challenge me at every turn, from her outfit to her +1. I enforced my rules, hoping to avoid any disruptions. Despite the tension, I was determined to have a beautiful wedding day. The day arrived and initially everything seemed perfect. My mother showed up in an approved outfit and appeared to be on her best behavior. But when it was time for speeches, she couldn't resist. Her hateful speech caught everyone off guard, and I saw my father's face fall. It was a moment I had dreaded but somehow expected. I realized that I couldn't let her narrative stand unchallenged. Taking a deep breath, I stood up and addressed the room. I spoke calmly and clearly, recounting the neglect, the missed moments, and the hurtful decisions. I made sure not to raise my voice, presenting my truth with dignity. The room was silent, and my mother's face twisted with anger. She stormed out, leaving a trail of shocked whispers. In the aftermath, she informed me I was cut out of her will. While it stung, I felt a sense of liberation. I no longer had to pretend or maintain a facade for the sake of family unity. I had my own family now, with a husband who loved me, and a father who had always been there. My wedding day, despite the drama, marked the beginning of a new chapter 1, where I was free from my mother's toxic influence. Looking back, I see the value in standing up for myself. It was a painful journey, but it taught me resilience and self-worth. My mother's actions no longer define me. I am proud of the person I've become and the life I've built. As I move forward, I carry with me the lessons learned and the strength gained from overcoming a lifetime of hurt. I approved the least crazy speech and informed her that I preferred she didn't make a speech at all. She seemed quite offended by this, but I managed to salvage the situation by explaining that the only reason I was avoiding speeches was that my dad wasn't giving one either. I added that I didn't want the ceremony to run overtime, because people were bringing their kids, so we wanted to keep everything as short and sweet as possible. This wasn't true, but by the time she found out, it would be too late for her to do anything about it. I thought I was out of danger, believing that my mother, though attending, wouldn't have any chance to mess things up. Unfortunately, true to her character, she managed to annoy me on my wedding day, despite my best efforts. I deeply regret inviting her. On the wedding day, after we exchanged vows, it was time for the speeches. As soon as my mother saw my father getting up and grabbing the mic, she shot me the dirtiest look she could muster. My father's speech was beautiful and emotional, making me forget about her dirty look. But then, to my horror, I saw her rising from her seat and taking the mic from my father. I wanted to intervene but didn't want to create a scene at my own wedding by snatching the mic away from her. My husband tried to redirect everyone to the dance floor, but my mother insisted that everyone remain seated to enjoy the little speech she claimed she had spent days writing for me. I was terrified as she started talking. Sure enough, her speech was all about herself and how I had absolutely ruined her life by being born. She went on and on about the sacrifices she had made as a mother, and how I didn't seem to appreciate any of them. She even threw in some tears to make it seem like she was hurt, and mentioned how I'd lied to her to prevent her from making a speech at my wedding. She told everyone that she had given up a big promotion when she was pregnant with me, because she didn't want to stress herself out before the delivery, and feared something would happen to me if she took the promotion. Apparently she was still paying the price for rejecting the promotion, because she was still working in a similar position for similar pay. I knew this wasn't true because my mother was quite well off. I had no idea what she was complaining about. But she went on, talking about how difficult I had been to raise, and how she expected me to be grateful for it. She reminded everyone of the boyfriend she had given up when I was in my teens, because they didn't appreciate me being around, and how she couldn't sacrifice her motherhood, yet I was willing to push her aside and pretend she wasn't an important part of my life for no reason. She ended the speech by declaring how selfless and great she had been as a mother, but obviously she had failed if her own daughter didn't deem her worthy of even telling her the truth. Her speech was dramatic and mostly embellished. Over the years I had put up with a lot from my mother, but this was too much for me to tolerate. I stood up and decided to reveal what kind of person she really was. I talked about everything from my childhood, how she used to treat me, how she competed with me in my teens, and how sickening her behavior was. My father's jaw dropped when I recounted these stories, because he had always insisted we keep such things private, believing the world didn't need to know our family's issues. He used to say it was to avoid washing dirty linen in public, but I believed he cared more about appearances than the truth. I could see everyone getting uncomfortable as I ranted about my mother. She looked at the floor, occasionally glaring at me, trying to intimidate me into shutting up. But the guests weren't her dates, and I was no longer a teen, so her intimidation tactics were ineffective. After I finished talking, I was in tears. My husband took me aside, opened the bar, and made sure food was served to distract the guests from gossiping about my meltdown. He told my parents to stay away for a while, and took me outside the venue to our hotel room so I could calm down. I was hiccuping from crying so hard, and it took several minutes to compose myself. He comforted me throughout, and after a while I felt better and said I was ready to go back. There was no way I was missing my own wedding over something my mother did. I always knew she was jealous of me, and this was just her jealousy manifesting in its worst form. My husband told me to wait in the room for a while so he could check if my mother was gone. He asked if I wanted my father to stay, and I said yes because, despite everything, he was still my father, and I didn't want to let him go. After about 10 minutes he returned and told me I could come back because my mother had left. Apparently she had left right after I walked out because she didn't come to be insulted by her own daughter. My father had actually yelled at her and kicked her out after she said that. I was pleased to hear that. When I returned, my father apologized, and we hugged, which felt great. We resumed the event, and many guests told me they admired my bravery in calling out my mother's rubbish in front of so many people, especially on my wedding day. My mother-in-law was also impressed, saying she was glad her son was marrying such a strong and intelligent woman. That made me feel much better, and by the end of the day, I had pretty much forgotten about the incident. Back in my hotel room, I finally had time to check my phone. I noticed a message from my mother. Out of curiosity, I opened it and found a picture of a speech she had written. To my surprise, it was actually quite sweet. She had sent the picture a couple of hours after leaving, along with a message saying this was the speech she had written ages ago. On the day I sent my mother the wedding invitation, I had clearly informed her that no one would be giving speeches at my wedding. At first, she almost discarded the invitation, perhaps disheartened by the perceived slight. However, she decided to keep it and planned to give me her speech as an early wedding gift. Her actual wedding gift was supposed to be a car, which was intended to be a surprise I would receive a week after the wedding. This car was meant to symbolize a new start, a gesture of goodwill, and an attempt to mend our strained relationship. However, things took a drastic turn on the wedding day. After she witnessed my father and even my in-laws giving heartfelt speeches, she realized I had lied to her about the no-speech policy. Feeling deeply hurt and betrayed, she confronted me with her true feelings. She told me that she had been well aware of our troubled history, but had seen the wedding invitation as an opportunity to make amends. The speech she had written was her way of apologizing for past misunderstandings and hurts. But because I had lied to her, she never got the chance to deliver that apology. In her confrontation, she expressed her deep disappointment and pain. She told me she wished me nothing but happiness on my new journey, but also said that she never wanted to meet or hear from me again. She felt that I had broken her heart and insulted her deeply over a petty feud from ages ago. Her words made me realize that I had seriously misjudged her intentions. I had assumed that my mother would do something to ruin my special day, and in doing so, I preemptively lied to her, which ended up causing more harm than any potential speech could have. Reading her message left me feeling deeply disappointed and conflicted. For the past few days, I have kept this incident to myself, not wanting anyone to think that I am to blame. I am still grappling with the question of whether I am truly at fault here. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who left supportive comments. They have helped me reconsider my perspective on the situation with my mother. While lying to her may not have been the best course of action, I felt it was necessary given our tumultuous past. Yet, it's also convenient that she shifted the entire blame onto me. If she was truly intent on making amends and delivering her apology, she could have done so even after discovering that I had lied about the no-speech policy. The need for a public apology at my wedding seemed unnecessary. Only a few close family members were aware of the depth of our strained relationship, so her apology could have been more private and personal. I discussed this matter with my father and husband, and they offered an interesting perspective. They noticed that the letter she sent did not look old or worn. My mother claimed she wrote the speech months ago when she received the invitation, but the letter showed no signs of age, such as folds or creases. It looked freshly written. This raised the possibility that she wrote it on the day she was kicked out of the wedding and sent it to guilt-trip me. While I find it disheartening to believe this theory, I cannot entirely dismiss it given my mother's past behavior. The bottom line is that I have decided not to speak to her and not to feel guilty about the situation. Update 2. It has been almost 8 days since my wedding. During this time, my mother had not contacted me, and I assumed she had moved on. However, she unexpectedly showed up at my house yesterday. Both my husband and I were at home since it was the weekend. She insisted on speaking to both of us and wanted my father to be present as well. I was confused and hesitant to let her in, but she pushed her way through and sat on the couch. Once inside, she made a dramatic announcement. She informed us that she had decided to leave all her money to charity instead of to me, as she had originally planned. She directed this announcement at my husband, telling him that because of my awful behavior, we could now say goodbye to the inheritance we were expecting. She instructed me to relay this information to my father, emphasizing that he had been the one to kick her out of the wedding, which she took as a deep personal insult. She was adamant that because of this perceived slight, we would not inherit anything from her. This announcement left me and my husband stunned. It seemed like a final act of retribution from my mother, a way to assert her control and inflict one last emotional blow. I am trying to process the gravity of her decision and what it means for our relationship moving forward. My mother has always had a flair for the dramatic, but this felt like an extreme measure, even for her. It feels as though she is trying to punish me for what she perceives as a betrayal, without considering the context or the years of tension that led to my decision to lie about the speeches. My husband and I are now left to navigate this new reality. I have to come to terms with the fact that my relationship with my mother is more fractured than ever. Her decision to disinherit us feels like a final severing of ties, a declaration that she no longer sees me as her daughter. It's a painful realization, but I am determined to move forward and focus on building a happy life with my husband. Despite the hurt and the drama, our wedding day was a celebration of our love, and I want to hold on to that joy as we start this new chapter together. I brought up what she had said at my wedding, her speech about how I had ruined her career, and how she had to reject a promotion because she was expecting me. She went on about how she was stuck in a mediocre position because she never rose in the ranks after my birth. She looked flustered, probably not expecting to be called out on her lies. She told me that if not for my birth, she probably would have been working in an even higher position at a better company, but was stuck because of me. I laughed at that and told her that if she really wanted to be at the top, she would have worked hard and accomplished something instead of sitting around and blaming me for her shortcomings. I pointed out that she had enough time to advance in her career because it wasn't her who was taking care of me as a child, it was mostly my father doing all the hard work. I reminded her that if my father could juggle both raising a kid and advancing his business, then she had no excuse. She tried to argue, but I shut her down and told her that I didn't want her money anyway, because my husband and I were financially stable. Besides, it wasn't even as though she was going to leave us a fortune. It didn't matter to us, so she could cut us out of her will, and we still wouldn't care. I then politely asked her to leave, but she refused and told me that she wasn't going to go anywhere without an apology first. I started getting pretty annoyed by her persistence and told her that I would call the cops, and have her removed from my property if she didn't leave on her own. She tried to insist that I was bluffing, and that I would do no such thing to my own mother. However, when she saw that I already had 911 dialed on my phone, she got up, cursed at me nastily, and then stormed out. That was our weekend. But it was nice to finally confront my mother and give her a piece of my mind without worrying about what other people would think. My husband was by my side through the whole thing, and even my father praised me for how I handled the situation. I really am very lucky to have them. Update 3. Hi, so it's been a week since my mother and I last spoke. She had been texting me on and off for a couple of days, trying to get me to apologize to her. She brought up every single nice thing she had done for me as a child, trying to emotionally manipulate me into feeling bad about what happened. But for every little good thing that she did, there were like hundreds of things that she did wrong. It wasn't exactly a balanced equation. I tried to ignore her for the most part and muted her notifications, but then she started texting me from her other number, which finally forced me to block her. I hadn't blocked her so far because my mother lives alone, and if anything were to happen to her, I would want to know, no matter how bad our relationship is. But now I don't think that I need to stay in touch with her anymore, or keep the door open if something, heaven forbid, happens to her. I have her neighbor's phone number, and I'll be able to check up on her that way, without directly giving her access to me. I just can't be kind anymore, and keep prioritizing family over my own self. It's not fair to me, and I'm just not going to do it anymore. Update 4. Okay, so it's been almost a month since my last update, and I really thought that it would be my last one, but I guess not. I just heard from one of my relatives that my mother was moving out of state. She had made a pretty big deal out of it on social media, making a post where she mentioned me and my father by name. She said that since we, her family, were no longer speaking to her, she didn't see any point in staying on because there was nothing left for her here anymore. It was a pretty emotional post overall, but I didn't respond to it, nor did I reach out to her. Just like she said, there was nothing left for me there anymore. I appreciate that she at least tried to make a last-ditch attempt at getting us back, but unfortunately, I'm way past the point of forgiveness now. I wish her the best for her future, but I wish I never have to meet her again. As cruel as it sounds, it's the truth. I've realized that I need to focus on my own well-being and not let toxic family dynamics pull me down. It's been a tough journey, but I'm finally at a place where I can prioritize my happiness and peace of mind. The confrontation at my wedding was a turning point for me. For years, I had listened to my mother blame me for her perceived failures, and it took a toll on my self-esteem. However, standing up to her in front of my friends and family was liberating. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. My husband and father's support has been invaluable. They helped me see that I am not responsible for my mother's choices, and that her constant guilt-tripping was unfair and manipulative. Since the confrontation, I've had time to reflect on my relationship with my mother. Her emotional manipulation wasn't a one-time occurrence, it was a pattern that had defined our relationship for as long as I could remember. And she often used guilt as a weapon, making me feel indebted to her for sacrifices she claimed to have made. But now I see things clearly. Her sacrifices were her choices, and she had no right to hold them over my head. Blocking her was a difficult decision, but it was necessary for my mental health. Her constant messages were a reminder of her manipulative tactics, and I couldn't allow that negativity to infiltrate my life anymore. I had to draw a line to protect myself. Knowing that I can still check on her through her neighbor gives me some peace of mind. I care about her well-being, but I need to maintain my boundaries. Hearing about her moving out of state was unexpected. It's strange to think that she's physically removing herself from our lives after emotionally distancing herself for so long. Yet her public display on social media, naming me and my father, seemed like another attempt to manipulate us through guilt. But I've grown stronger. I didn't engage with her post because I knew it wouldn't lead to anything positive. Responding would only reopen old wounds, and I need to keep them closed for my healing process. Ultimately, my focus now is on building a healthy, happy life with my husband and maintaining a positive relationship with my father. I'm grateful for the support system I have and the strength I've found within myself. This journey has taught me the importance of self-respect and the power of setting boundaries. It's not easy to distance oneself from a parent, but sometimes it's necessary for personal growth and happiness. I hope my mother finds peace in her new life, just as I am finding peace in mine.